Hello, podcast listeners. Have you ever seen the show Mad Men? Well, get ready because I'm going to talk about it for a lot. And Tucker's going to tell you about some VHSs that he found that he thinks are so important, but I disagree. Just wait for it, all right? And then lastly, we're going to really crap talk a fast food restaurant. You're going to want to listen to this whole episode. Don't just stop at 38 minutes. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
How does gas get passed in your home? Do you and Jill just let it fly in front of each other?
I do. She's still pretty, but she'll burp. She's a good burper.
Okay, I mean, that counts. Yeah, absolutely. Does she lean into it? Is it more like I'm going to try to make sure no one hears this?
No, sometimes it's did you hear that?
Sometimes I burp into the microphone for you just forgetting for a moment. It's not just the two of us.
Right. That there's somebody in a truck somewhere going, ugh.
I don't edit them out, though.
I know you do.
I leave those in.
I've heard them back before.
Yeah.
Tucker, I wanted to specifically talk today about a television series that I'm rewatching through for, I'm going to say, the 7th time.
Adventures of Pete and Pete?
No.
DuckTales?
No. This is much more, how would I say this? It's less adult man-child and more like, ooh, that's a good one. And I know it's a series that is near and dear to your heart.
Oh, then
as
it's
well.
The Sopranos.
No.
Oh.
No.
And
it actually features a previous guest on this podcast.
Oh, Mad Men.
Mad Men.
You're
correct.
watching the Mad Men.
Mad Men.
And you're talking about Richard Summer.
I am.
I think from episode 7 or something.
Yeah, who went to Concordia.
Yeah, back in the day.
And David Winterstein was kind enough to call him and interrupt a board game that he was playing and have him come over to record with us.
Yeah, and cried during the horseplay.
Oh, I still tell people that.
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you why I think Mad Men is such an important show. So first and foremost, the first time I watched Mad Men, the first episode, I didn't even make it the whole way through. I turned it off. I was like, nope. The entire first season had come out before I finally went back and said, I'm going to try and watch this first episode again. And my sister had it all on DVD because she and her now husband were hooked instantly. Could barely get through the first episode again. The third time around, I finally said, everyone seems to say that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I have to find out why. And I was like, I'm going to get past it. And I think part of the problem right away is it is about an era where everybody is smoking nonstop. And when I see smoking on television and in movies, it grosses me out because my parents are smokers and I hate the smell of smoke. And so even the very first scene of it is all about cigarettes and smoking. And why do you smoke Admirals? Well, they gave it to us in the Army. But I want to tell you this. Sometimes you've got to force yourself to look at something with fresh eyes, because I finished that first episode. By the time I got to the end of the second episode, I was fully hooked, right? I was ready to rock and roll.
What happens in episode 2 that just clinched you?
Honestly, it was absolutely nothing other than the fact that I immediately saw the potential in what's going on.
Got it.
Right? You start to understand the characters. I think we think Don Draper is the lead character of the show. And while Don is a main character, the show is populated by such amazing other characters that as I like what happens with Don Draper, but I really want to see more about what happens with other characters. And I think they do a really good job balancing those things out. These are the reasons why I think Mad Men is a good show. And if you haven't watched it, hopefully I can influence you to at least give it a try. Number one, it is a love letter to an era. And the details that go into creating this late 50s look, 60s like throwback is really amazing. And as the show goes on, I think they cover, it's like, it might be 9 or 10 years past total in the span of the entire show. And you get into some pretty wild stuff. You know, the hairstyles change. There's a whole episode where all of a sudden everyone's got these big ass mustaches out of nowhere. And it's stellar. And you get characters. I think the first episode where I absolutely fall in love with Roger Sterling is
favorite character in that show.
Roger Sterling is one of the best written characters ever, because he's so incredibly flawed and he knows he's flawed.
Well, and John Slattery wears him like a second skin.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's one thing I noticed about the very first episode is that Slattery hasn't quite hit exactly who Roger Sterling is quite yet.
Yep.
But but then once you get to episode 2, you can see the gap that must have happened between the pilot filming and then filming episode 2. He's slimmed down a little bit and he's just a little more at home. But once that hits, it's a career defining role for him.
And he is a man who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So the reason he's even at this ad agency is because his dad was one of the people who founded it, and they just sort of inherited him.
And that's acting talent right there, is getting us to love a guy who's just always been a 1%er, will always be a 1%er.
And it takes you a long time to realize that he's actually really good at the job they put him. You know, he's accounts management, which means his job is to wine and dine people, convince them that that's the right company to work with them. And at first you think, well, he's just there because he has the same last name as one of the founders.
Yeah, he's got Lucky Strike.
But he's like, at one point you find out he's good at what he does, right? Like he's an interesting character because he knows that he needs to give as well as he receives in a lot of cases.
I always get obsessed with an actor's performance when I just feel like they're doing something that's kind of next level, where they're so in the zone.
They're so good.
I can't see the acting, kind of a thing. And Slattery has a lot of moments of that for Sterling. There's one where Draper walks into his office and he's getting off the phone with some young woman that he's been having sex with. And he goes, "That's a coat check girl from Long Island or Rhode Island. It's too easy." And his delivery of that line, it's so effortless. It's weird to compare them, but I put him in the same league as Catherine O'Hara, where I see her do stuff.
True, yeah.
And I go, I can't see the acting. She's that fucking good at what she's doing. I think Slattery's the same. But it is filled with amazing actors. I mean, John Hamm is Don Draper. Come on, the most handsomest man alive.
And not only that, but John Hamm, I think, needs to get the full credit because he not only portrays one of the most dramatic, interesting characters we've ever seen on television, but he's also hilarious too. And he is one of those guys who like I love the movie Confess Fletch, right? He does a great job in that movie. In Bridesmaids, he's only got like 6 minutes of screen time and he's hilarious.
And in Mad Men, he looks like the illustrations of the ideal man in marketing at that time. I mean, you could not have found someone better. I remember hearing stories from Matthew Weiner, the showrunner, about how he had to fight to get John Hamm the part. Like the studio didn't want him, which is crazy if you think about it now.
It is so
but I guess,
crazy.
I mean, you know, James Gandolfini ran into something very similar with The Sopranos. I just think that's it's so crazy how they take a chance and it just hits. And then it seems like it would have been a foregone conclusion.
We would not have had Mad Men if it hadn't been for Sopranos.
Yeah, quite literally.
And I think they learned a lot about making a show like Mad Men from watching The Sopranos gets made. And one of the reasons why I think the balance of humor and drama is done so well, because they saw, you know, there are great episodes of The Sopranos where something heavy is happening, but then they also like, I think of the
funniest
episode
moments happen on
where
the
like
show.
Tony and Chris rob you know, like they steal the wine.
Vipers from the Vipers.
And how funny that aspect is. And then you see they're like, oh yeah, we can lean it. It doesn't have to be drama.
I still will roll whenever, Jimmy Olsen over here, when like one of those sort of Italian sort of slangs come out. There's so many funny moments in that show.
The full disclosure, I do not like and I can't remember her name. That's how little I like her. The girl who plays Peggy.
I know you've said that. The Scientologist.
Oh, she's in Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah, Elizabeth Moss.
I just don't care for her at all. But now that being
I think
said,
she's beautiful.
I think that like she's amazing in this show.
Yeah.
And I think that they held a lot of her back that first season. They're like, your job in this first season is just to, we're seeing The Office through your eyes, right? Because you're the new girl. And so we're going to, and I think that they at one point decided like, wait, hold on. There's a lot more that Peggy Olson represents than just the token. We're going to make this woman now a part of the, the boys club.
Right. She was primed from the beginning, though, to have an incredible arc because her character begins at the bottom of the hierarchy. Right, she is brand new in a world that tries to keep women out of it. Right, and then so I think they had an understanding that if this show continues, this is a character with that potential for having them go on such a crazy journey because of their starting point versus like say. But Roger Sterling has his own arc, even though he's always the boss of this company. But where he goes emotionally and how empty you see he is inside is pretty nuts as well. And the two of them sort of form like a weird friendship over the years. Can I ask? Maybe you said it and I missed it. You said this is the 7th time you've watched.
I think this is at least the 7th time I've been through the entire series,
and that's huge. I mean, to even watch a series a second time through is massive. What got you to 7, and why now? Why are you watching through it again?
During the pandemic, we needed a show to watch through. So I finished it. I watched it air live, right? So I was watching it all the way through the finale. So I count that as view 1, right?
Yep.
And then about a year later, I told Jill, I think you should really watch this show. It's really good. And so we watched through it again. That next winter, we watched through it again because we were... I think like it was just been a harsh winter and we needed something that was kind of comforting that we liked. And so we watched through that again. And we kind of got in this rotation of once a year, it became the show that we watched through, but we didn't necessarily pay attention to it like nonstop. But during the pandemic, we had a deep watch through where I actually bought, it was like $120, this companion book set that goes along with it.
Oh, wow.
The pictures are just gorgeous, but it's got insight into every single episode and like stuff that you need to watch. And so we went through and we watched it and then we'd read, a chapter of this book and it would explain what's going on. It is one of the best curated companion pieces I've ever seen for any type of media. It is fantastic. It's out of this world. And the books are enormous. Like they're supposed to be coffee table books, but they're like, we can't do this in one book because it's too friggin' big. So they split it into several volumes. And when I touch it, I put on plastic gloves because I don't want to get barbecue sauce on them or whatever it is. And they're high def photos that are, the books themselves are, when I say tabloid size, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So 11 by 17.
Yeah.
So that's the size of these books. Like they're massive.
How many?
There's 4 of them. Okay. And it spans through all the seasons. And some are just pictures from the show. Some are behind the scenes pieces. And like, it's wonderful. So the main characters that you get introduced to right away that I think are interesting are you meet Don Draper, who's our lead, but at one point they're like there are whole episodes where you only see Don for like 2 minutes.
He's the main character, but he's not the only point of view character.
Right?
Yeah.
You meet Don's family, Betty, and then his daughter and son. And the son, it's jokingly is like never. I think only one kid lasted more than one season playing the son. They just swapped out the bobbies over and over and over again.
Sure.
But the daughter became such an instant hit that there's no way you start that show with the intent of her arc getting to where it is by the end of the show. That had to have happened organically by saying like, he needs to explore this because in the first season, they try and make Bobby, they try and make his son represent a little bit of Don's past. So there's the episode where Don goes and wakes his son up in the middle of the night and tells me, you can ask me anything. You can ask me anything. Yeah. And I think they quickly found like, listen, this is not the kid that we necessarily need to follow, but there is a storyline with the daughter. And they put her into some pretty weird positions. There's an episode, I believe it's in the second season, where she's caught touching herself at a neighbor's, and she's very young. And watching these two parents try and talk about why this girl's getting dropped off in the middle of the night from a sleepover it is awkward and weird. And the parents get mad at her, and then they're like, I should cut your fingers off. And so before you know it, all of a sudden Sally Draper becomes this character that they think has potential. And by the time you get to, I think it's like season 2, episode 3, you feel like, yep, they're going to move ahead and have her be more than just an ornament that exists inside the Draper household.
I'm trying to remember, is she the first or the last phone call?
She's the first, right?
It's either her or Peggy, because I think Betty, right? Betty Draper, is the second. I think,
right,
if I'm remembering correctly, but I can't remember if Sally is the first call he makes or the last call that he makes. I don't remember.
I feel like it's the first, right?
Okay, I'm not sure. But I can't remember.
Anyway, and if you watch the series, you'll know what we're talking about. So you get the Draper family, then you get to meet the people at the office, and the people at the office, they could not have done a better job casting this show, because you meet these salesmen, and they are they're like, yep, I'm going to get myself a wife, and I'm going to get myself a house in the country. And, I'm going to live the American dream as you see it on the back of a Life magazine, right? Ken Cosgrove, amazing character. Love me some Ken Cosgrove. And at one point you kind of feel like, okay, so now that we've explored these characters a little bit, we got to give them a backstory. Ken's one of my favorites. Ken gets, in my opinion, the best screw you storyline by the end of this, because at one point they're sending him out to Detroit all the time because they're doing all this work with a major car company, and an accident takes place, and then they decide he's not worthy of being an accounts man anymore. It's great stuff. You also get to meet Peter Campbell, and Peter Campbell, it's funny because they're like, this is your storyline, Peter Campbell. And they kind of are shoehorning him in. But what's really nice is they change what his trajectory is too. And they realize there's more to Peter Campbell than there is to Peter Campbell. The guy who plays Peter Campbell's from the Minneapolis area. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
So when he auditioned, he was pretty much like a hippie. And so he shows up and he's got, like long hair and a beard. And they said, this character's really clean cut. And he goes, I guess I could do that. No big deal. And so he did not look anything like the Peter Campbell that we know today in this. Then you get to talk, Rich Summer hops on there. And I never really fully understood what his job was before they make him the head of television. Was he an accounts guy? He certainly wasn't a creative.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I'm not quite sure.
I feel like maybe he was like a junior accounts man, but he didn't have anything that was necessarily on his own. He was more like almost like the assistant to the more senior accounts people.
Had he stayed an accounts man, he probably would have failed, but was able to find the place for him to go.
Right.
And to kind of create an avenue for him to go into.
And, if I had the chance to get Rich Summer on again, I would love to grill him about Mad Men and be like, okay, so tell me about this. Did you know what Harry Crane was going to do? And, he gets a fun thing because when he gets into the television side of things, because at the beginning of this, they're focusing a lot on print work, on radio commercials, and television is just sort of coming into the mix a little bit. It's something like people see as valuable as an ad medium, but he gets an absolutely amazing storyline where once he gets into the television side of things, he starts going out to LA and he comes back and he's sunburned. And he's probably the most insecure of any character. Yeah. And he definitely is the guy who loves to, tell, he tells everyone the news. He's like, but don't tell Don. This is my news to tell. Mm-hmm. I love Harry Crane.
He does the walkout during the carousel speech because he's cheated on his wife and he's struggling with the fact that he's done that, which is a great moment.
I just watched that episode.
I think it's was it him and Pete come up with the idea of buying up all the TV ad real estate during the election or something like that.
And the idea is that they'll buy up all the ads, so there's no availability for Kennedy to buy additional ads.
And there's like a moment where Sterling and Cooper are like congratulating them, and Sterling says, I didn't think you had it in you, and I mean that. But also, Cooper is a great character as well.
So, in brilliant casting with Robert Morris, who is a famous Broadway actor, and the voice of a pound puppy from the animated Pound Puppies. He was Howler. And so they bring in Robert Morris to be the final surviving member of the original team that started Sterling Cooper.
He's like a Randian, elitist who is very much, a classist, but also who deeply understands sort of how the world works on some level, and is the one who, there's an amazing scene, him, Sterling, Draper, where Draper has decided to fire Pete Campbell because Pete Campbell brought ideas to a client. And so Sterling and Draper get called into Cooper's office, and there's this great conversation, and the acting in it is sublime, absolutely sublime, especially, and even just the writing, they basically let you know that Cooper has known Sterling since he was a kid, because Sterling comes in and looks at an old black and white photo and goes, "You love that photo, don't you?" And he says, "You were cute back then," right? Really amazing moments like that. You also get how brilliant Don is and how he struggles to maintain that when he has to pay, fealty to someone. So Cooper's talking about how the city runs like a big watch, and as he's describing it, Draper's like, "Sounds more like a bomb to me," and you're the one who uses the words. You know how much we value. It is such a great scene for an actor to watch, but it's also a great scene to watch if you are an opinionated employee at a company, because at some point, even if you're the best employee there, you're going to get called into the boss's office at some point, and if they're nice enough, they're going to let you try to keep as much of your dignity as possible while letting you know that the thing you wanted to happen isn't going to happen. It's going to happen another way. It's a great scene to watch for that. And of course, then Sterling comes up with the best way to manage the situation, but I don't want to spoil that for anyone else coming out of it.
Cooper also is great because he understands nepotism, right? Like his business has been built on nepotism for so long that he's got a great line of like, "I don't want, like Dinah Campbell coming up to me in the Hamptons and wondering why we let her grandson go." And just knowing about the politics of something like that, I think is really, really clever.
Certainly in Manhattan, certainly in New York and all that old money, because even the family he's talking about weren't wealthy anymore, but they still were connected. Right.
Yeah, because they
dumped all of it in the stock crash because some people don't have any confidence in this country.
It was like the third or fourth time I had been through the series that something really struck me. So Roger Sterling's character, just by the age-wise, was in the Navy during World War II, and he is very xenophobic when it comes to Asian cultures, specifically the Japanese.
Yep.
He absolutely, he almost completely sabotages an opportunity they have to work with Honda at one point. But it wasn't until like the fourth time I went through it that I realized, Cooper's obsessed with Japanese culture, and it's all over his office. It's his artwork. Yeah. It's the fact that he asks you to take your shoes off before you enter the office. And how difficult that, because Roger never shows it to him, right? He never gets in there and gets in Cooper's face about like, you got to take that off your wall, and 140 people on my boat died and like because of them.
Right. And it's such an interesting generational difference between Cooper and Sterling and Draper, because each generation of men had their own war.
Yeah.
Right. So like Sterling goes over to eat dinner and at the Draper's house in bed, he's like, Don never talks about the war. And Sterling goes, oh, you mean his war? Yeah, I remember that. I remember hearing about that war, and Draper's like, "Well, you boys, took up all the glory when you were out there." And I'm presuming Cooper was either, I think he's in military dress when you see him with baby Sterling on his knee, which would of course imply World War I or some other conflict of some kind. And not that wars have ceased since then, but that's sort of interesting to look at that as like at that point in time. if you were a man in this country, it was assumed that you would have your own war. You would go and fight at some point, which is fucking crazy.
And they hold that against the younger generation, right? Like they're holding it against the Pete Campbells of the world who don't understand. There's a very specific
who are just
episode,
anti-war, right? Who are just saying, I don't want to do that.
They deal with hippies a lot, like the beginning of the Flower Child movement. We haven't even begun to touch on like the female cast members, but before we move away from the other people in the office, you've got Harry Crane, Ken Cosgrove, Peter Campbell,
Joan.
Kinsey. Oh, you were gonna? I was gonna say Kinsey, who is this sort of ultra progressive writer, and it's really a shame because his character disappears after the second season for a long time.
Is it not the third season?
Is it the second season where they?
I thought it was the end of the third season where they decide to go into business for themselves. Yep. Then he shows up to the office and
they didn't take me.
They're gone and he's just done.
And then all of a sudden they bring him back like in the fifth season, and he's become a member of the Hare Krishna.
I actually stopped early on in fourth season, not intentionally. It just sort of like dropped off because other things happened in life and I just didn't pick it back up. So at some point I need to go back and probably just start at the beginning of season 4 and then crunch through 4 and 5. But I've watched a ton of scenes from 4 and 5.
It's so worth it. They also did the like season 6 part 1, season 6 part 2. I'm so glad that we've gotten past that and they're like, listen, we're not going to break up seasons anymore. This is ridiculous.
I thought they ended at season 5, so they have a season 6 then, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it always pissed me off. And they did with Sopranos too, where they're like, you're going to get 4 episodes and then you're going to wait 6 more months. Then you get 4 more episodes.
So for Game of Thrones, it was 7 and 8, right?
Yeah.
That should have all been 7. I would have preferred that it had been 7.1 and 7.2 because it feels like it's really just enough content for one season.
Right. Like, why not make a really long final season? Right. You've got, and like, you could, when you have a really established television show, one of the beauties is, when you're trying to birth new shows, you tag them with the other show, right? Mm-hmm. So on Sunday nights, when you've got The Sopranos, now is the time to bring in another show to try and see if you can, because people are already tuning in for this,
right? To
see if you can grab them for that. And so having a 17 episode long final season, even if it took you 3 years to make it, is way more worthwhile than the big long breaks. And I'm sure the actors probably prefer it too, because then you don't have to do 2 press junkets like that.
If you're at 7 watch throughs, how many watch throughs do you think you have in you? How many times do you think you'll watch through the Mad Men?
I think I'm good every 3 years. I'm going to watch through it without a doubt.
Okay.
Because I've also begged other people to watch it. My radio partner, Amy Eiler, during the pandemic, she was like, well, do you have a recommendation? Because she was never a TV or movie person. And I really push. I'm like, you and your husband should watch Mad Men. I think one of the reasons Amy would really love it is Amy is a fantastic champion of women's rights, and you watch an evolution take place during this show that I think is really interesting, incredibly frustrating. She had some insight into the show that I didn't know about, and she even found out that at one point her husband had been watching ahead on certain episodes, and she put the kibosh on that immediately. And like, no, we are watching these at the same time. You can't get ahead. And like, what a gift that people get with some of these shows where you don't have to wait. How long did we wait for Sopranos to wrap up? I mean, is it 9 years total?
Well, I can't remember, but I actually didn't start watching The Sopranos until season 6 was just about to start coming out.
Oh boy.
So like I just marathon Sopranos up until season 6 started playing. And so it didn't feel long for me because it took me forever. I was in the altos well before I ever watched The Sopranos.
Oh, this is way funnier now that I know what I'm parodying.
No, not really. You don't really need that reference to know that that's a bad dinner
Sure.
theater, which I wonder if that's still... Do you think they're still producing the altos
I
in
think
town?
They probably are.
It should
you
call
can
up
brush up rehearsal and make yourself $40.
Randy Red Shoes and be like, hey, man, are you still selling this? Do you still do the Goodyear tire jokes? Because those are in there.
They're big, yeah. Right? Everyone remember that? Remember that? Okay. Joan Harris, the character Christina Hendricks plays,
unbelievable,
is the office sex pot. And she is the person who runs all of the secretaries. So this is an era where you had a typewriter, and every night when you left, you had to take a cover out, a plastic cover, and put it over your typewriter so that dust wouldn't get in and hurt the machinery. Mm-hmm. And Joan, who wore a pin around her neck at all times, is this vivacious and curvy woman who absolutely commands the attention of every room that she's in and is so smart. And there are moments in this show where I think Christina Hendricks, just give her an Emmy for it, because she does some acting, because she's the character herself acts in the show. Like the actress plays this character so well that Joan is actually acting in, depending on what like group of people she's in at what time. And it's amazing. I noticed this last watch through that like the first 3 episodes, she has a roommate named Carol who confesses her love for Joan. And Joan just kind of like goes like, you just need a fun night out and we'll meet some boys. And then you never see her again. But Joan stays in the same apartment. And so I'm always like, whatever happened to Carol?
Joan to me feels like the ultimate realist.
Yeah.
Where she seems to be the one character, to me at least, who truly sees the world for what it is and has a deep understanding of how people work and of what's going on. Or she just seems to exude that in some. And I don't mean to say that she knows absolutely everything. She just seems to be the one. She of the members of their team, she's the one you want in your corner, because she's the one you can count on 100% of the time. There's not another character on that show that you could, as a coworker, count on 100% of the time.
And they allude to that, like in one of the first like episodes where Don explains that like if you need anything, go to Joan, but don't tell Joan more than she needs to know. And it's very, very clever. You know, Joan sees things that other people don't see and notice. She has without a doubt, I think, one of the saddest last couple seasons on that show. And you watch this person that you've been rooting for the whole time just get crapped on and crapped on and crapped on, and how realistic that is for women of that time. It pisses me off every time I watch it, and I always, no, Joe, no. And the interesting thing about her too is like, so I mean they included her figure on a bunch of stuff, right? Because she's got the hourglass figure. But she's the one woman that Dawn never tries to sleep with.
Yeah, the two of them never have that. Yeah,
Dawn is how would my grandfather's Swiss girlfriend say? He's a cat who goes over the fence. And Dawn, throughout this whole show, it's populated each season, it seems like, with a woman that he has a torrid affair with and changes something deep within him. And then for whatever reason, he just ditches them by the wayside.
There's something so interesting about Dawn and Joan's dynamic as friends, because from a perspective of, like, say, quote, sexual value, right? They're the two most desired characters in the show by the other characters in the show. They have this power that no one else seems to have. But that's not necessarily the link between them, their commonality.
Yeah.
There's a level of outsiderness in some way. There's a romanticism of life there. There is an understanding of where sexual relationships take you. And so I think the two of them, while they may on some level be attracted to each other as, you know, human beings with eyes and feelings, they both also seem to intrinsically understand there's no good endpoint to that, right? This is way better that we are this thing. And that they have both explored the realm of romantic sensuality so much that it's almost like their relationship is its own type of sensuality that requires no physical contact, right? It's hard to put into words. I know it sounds maybe I'm talking gibberish here, but there's one scene where the two of them are having drinks at a bar.
It's a phenomenal scene.
You know,
it's a phenomenal scene. In fact, I think there's 3 situations where it's Dawn and Joan together that I think are great representatives of the show. One is the scene in the bar where they're together, and you kind of feel like, oh, if they'd had a couple drinks, maybe they'd go home together. And then you realize that's not what it is. It's 2 people who've been beaten down by the world but seem to have everything at the same time, talking together. Another great is there's an episode called A Man Walks Into an Advertising Agency, and Joan and Don find themselves in an ER waiting room, and Joan is covered in blood from an accident, and Don walks in and she's buying a Dr. Pepper out of the machine, and he goes, "Oh my God." And she just looks at her dress and she's like, "I know." And then they have a conversation before anybody else who's important to the to the plot line gets there. And it's a great conversation. And the third one is a conversation that he and Joan have on a night after they're going to land an account for Jaguar. That is a turning point in the show that is so good, and the timing of it is done so incredibly well. And I can't get enough of that dynamic between the two of them, and they do a great job of not overusing it. It rewards that viewer when they get to see it. Another great moment for Joan Harris is a character has a heart attack, and she gets called in the middle of the night, and she doesn't know what it's for, and she has to hide her emotions and be a secretary essentially while she writes a note, like a memo, to every single client that they have. It's great stuff. And then they're like, "Oh, and she plays the accordion." Like they're like, "Joni plays the accordion." It's beautiful.
I don't know if she still is, but Christina Hendricks was married to the guy who
believe they split.
They split?
Yeah, the snozberries taste like snozberries.
Taste like in the biggest case of what the fuck?
Yeah,
I've ever seen.
Be like, it's clearly like at one point he was a bigger star than she was, and that is definitely swapped at this point.
He's the Anna Faris and she's the Chris Pratt.
Right, and then at one point the universe seems to correct itself in a weird way,
and it's not going back. No, it's never going back.
And then they explore other interesting characters and then moments in history too. Some of my other favorite characters that don't flow throughout the whole series or just come and go kind of as they please. A little boy named Glenn. And I think that's Matthew Weiner, the show creators. I think it's his son who plays that role.
I remember who Glenn is.
Glenn is the little boy that Betty babysits and then asks for like a lock of her hair. His mother is divorced. It's the first family in their town that's divorced.
Okay.
And then Glenn follows through. Like Glenn ends up going to like a boarding school for boys, and then he starts to have a relationship with Sally Draper, and this kid who looks weird gets weirder as he gets older, but you're like, "Oh yeah, Glenn Bishop, you're an interesting duck, aren't you?" And speaking of duck, what's his first name? Duck Phillips. They bring up as an account manager is this amazing character actor, and he comes and goes throughout the whole thing, and they explore alcoholism. He's the first person who they explore with as being someone who had been treated for the cure because he had been hitting the sauce too hard. And there are moments with him when he's spiraling. There are moments with him that are just, there's one of the saddest moments of the whole thing that involves his dogs. Do you remember the episode where,
No.
So Duck is also divorced in this. And at one point his wife drops his two like champion, like these giant, like greyhound dogs with long coats. And he realizes like, I can't have dogs, and he loves them. They're like Chauncey and Champion. And at the end of the episode, he just opens the door and lets them into the streets of New York. And you realize like, Jesus, this guy is, I mean, and it's not that he's doing it necessarily to be cruel, to be like, "Get out there and die, you dogs." It's that he's like, "I can't do anything, and I've gotta, that these dogs are holding me back, and I've got to focus on my career." So Duck Phillips is a favorite that you get to see a bunch. Betty has a series of friends. Betty is played by January Jones from South Dakota originally.
I thought she was from North Dakota. Is South Dakota?
South Dakota, yeah.
Okay.
I think she's Sioux Falls. I think she's from Sioux Falls originally.
Okay.
She also played, who's the diamond woman in
Emma
X-Men?
Frost, the White Queen.
Yeah. And Magneto cracked her
Mm-hmm.
in the movie X-Men First Class. She's also having an affair with Kevin Bacon. So Betty Draper. Now here's the thing. I can't stand Betty Draper. And Jill has accused me of being sexist because I don't like her character. And I'm like, I don't like this character. And while I agree that Don has stepped out of his marriage and is a piece of garbage, I'm also like, Betty's not the greatest, like, most supportive wife I've ever seen either.
But she's a victim of circumstance, though. I mean, she really, truly is. Oh, yeah.
Or is she a victim of privilege?
I think she's a victim of circumstance.
Because her attitudes towards things aren't always from isn't a reaction to the way like Don treats her in certain ways. She does some things that I think show that she's been broken for a long time. She just happens to have this porcelain good look on the outside, but she might be just completely batshit crazy.
Yeah, she's a victim of circumstances.
I don't think she's a victim of circumstances because you find out like her relationship with her parents, like the things that her mother like did to her. And I guess you might say that's a victim of circumstance, but let me put it this way. Her circumstance isn't all Don Draper related.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Cause like even after like the progression of the series, like you find out, her relationship with men in general is messed up.
Right. She's been hurt by them so many times.
To her daughter. She's so cruel to her daughter.
Yeah, she's needlessly cruel to Sally. No question about it. But I still think that doesn't happen. I consider her a tragic figure.
Yeah.
A truly tragic figure. Truly tragic figures can be despicable on some level or can be unlikable on some level. But I think you see the true Betty when she has that last phone call with Dawn. And you see that there's so much more there that's hidden under all this scar tissue underneath it.
I think one of the cruelest things I've ever seen revolving a television show and a character is in one season, and there's a plot line that goes along with it, Betty has gained a pretty significant amount of weight.
Betty or Peggy?
Betty. Betty has,
really? Okay.
Yeah, she's gained a significant amount of weight. And there's a very popular like YouTube clip that someone had put out that took all these scenes of her like getting out of the bathtub, and they took the song Black Betty and changed it to Whoa Fat Betty Bam Balam. Whoa Fat Betty Bam Balam, eating that ice cream Bam Balam.
Jesus.
Like getting out of the tub Bam Balam. And I remember like because I was on a Mad Men Reddit and this thing was being shared nonstop, and I was like, God, that is cruel. That I felt bad for her character because it clearly, she is someone who looks were incredibly important to her, and it was a way that you quantified your self-worth. And
I never realized your love for Mad Men ran this deep. 7 complete watch throughs.
Yeah.
$150 worth of coffee table books. And you are even in the community, the online community, where people are commenting and upvoting and downvoting and sharing memes and talking shit. That's fantastic. Would you
like to know the greatest tragedy of my Mad Men fandom?
What?
At one point during the run of the show, when it was still being like new episodes are being aired, they made a deal with Banana Republic where they designed a bunch of clothing inspired by Mad Men. And I drove to Minneapolis with the intent of like, this is one of the things I'm doing here. Walked to the Banana Republic. I had my credit card all paid off, and I was ready to buy a whole new Mad Men wardrobe because when Don wore his leisure clothes,
right.
So he's mostly in a suit, but when he wore his leisure clothes, like when he's getting drunk, putting together the playhouse for his kids.
Handsome man still has to handsome any time of day,
And like there's an episode where he goes to Hawaii and he's wearing like a Hawaiian shirt. I wanted that. I was like, I will look so good. So I go into Banana Republic and I'm like, let me see the shirts. The shirts were all built for John Hamm's physique, right? And so here I am, and I can't even get like the extra large to like button, and they're short, right? For whatever reason, they built this for people who are like topping out at 5'3".
Okay.
And so even when I got a shirt on, there was about 4 inches of stomach visible because they just weren't long enough. And I left and I was so sad. And it's funny because I left just as they were hanging all of these new posters of the Mad Men cast in their Banana Republic clothing. And I was so pissed off. I thought about writing a letter to both AMC and Banana Republic saying, this is bullshit.
Do you have copies of all of the letters you've written in anger to companies? Because that would make a great coffee book.
It would. Some of them I wrote longhand and sent, and so I never bothered to copy them because here's something that someone who writes a very strongly worded letter.
Yeah.
We don't think about Xerox.
See, I missed out on the opportunity to participate in like Mad Men parties where people just kind of dress up like it's that era, and you go have old fashions or whatever else you're going to drink. But I never got to participate in one of those. And I don't think to have a Mad Men party now feels kind of weird.
Yeah. I don't think actually that you could make that show today.
I think you could.
I don't think you could. I don't think that you could get away with some of the things that you put into that show, because if someone watched this show for the first time ever, I think they would be kind of turned off by this, even though they're trying to portray something in a historical fashion and quote unquote things were different back in the day. I think that sensibilities have changed in the same way that like you don't make a movie like American Pie nowadays, even if you do change up some of it. I just watched the movie Revenge of the Nerds the other day, and I thought to myself, I'm like, thank God we got this made in the 80s because it does not exist today.
But there are things like crimes are committed during that movie where it's like, this was a crime that just happened.
But
right?
even beyond, the crimes, the culture has changed so much that when people watch it, they're like, why are these guys the outcast just because they like computers and stuff? It just doesn't translate to an audience who have been raised in an era where nerd culture is so heralded.
How amazing though would it be for a Revenge of the Jocks movie to come out?
Ted C. McGinley would do it. I know he would.
That would actually be pretty killer.
And really, that is the premise of which one is it? Is it Revenge of the Nerds 3?
Okay.
This is the next, and it's called Revenge of the Nerds 3, The Next Generation. The Tri-Lambs are the most popular fraternity on campus, and they've got all these things. And Ted C. McGinley comes back, and he's looking at the alpha betas, and he's like, you guys, this used to be the best. And so they start sabotaging the nerds.
Gotcha. I just bought on VHS Revenge of the Nerds in my CBS Fox gray and white block text slipcover.
It's
collection.
got great. The cover art on that is just top notch.
What's the character? Is the character's name Booger? Is that his name?
Booger, yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Again, probably couldn't get away with like your character named
You could
Booger.
totally call a character Booger.
You think so?
Yes,
100%. I think people are like, nope, not gonna happen.
I think it's almost a good thing if you do it and people get upset. That's actually a good thing because most people don't get upset. Just the really dumb ones. Just the really loud babies do.
Yeah.
And making them cry is awesome.
The people who don't bother to like watch the movie, they just read the slipcover and like character Booger, and they're like, what?
It's not the not liking it. It's the having to let everyone know that you are offended and that they should be aware of that.
Sure.
That's the dumb part. Like, shut the fuck up. Just get out of here.
You're fine.
You're fine. But were we talking about Beavis and Butthead recently? Maybe
just on the last podcast.
I have been going down the Beavis and Butthead rabbit hole just because their new episodes are so goddamn good.
It's good.
And I love the fact that they haven't changed whatsoever. But also it shows how actually innocuous they were in the first place.
Bingo, right?
Like we thought that. I remember my parents, clutching their pearls, right? When, oh my God, Beavis and Butthead. But I watch it now, even those episodes back then, the tamest stuff you could possibly come up with.
The ultra conservatives waged this war where they got on things like 60 Minutes and they told you that this is the reason your children are dumb. This is why we have violence in schools. And they did the same thing to video games. Now, what's amazing is at one point they blamed video games for Columbine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the games that came out like leading up to Columbine? Now, I think that there is something about like desensitizing to violence at this point because video games have become much more violent. But at that point, no one was playing Super Mario 64 and being influenced for violence.
No, the violence we were desensitized to at that time was maybe video game violence. Now the violence we're desensitized to are literally mass school shootings.
Right.
Like now,
how many have happened so far in this year that it's commonplace?
Yeah, it's really violence begets violence, not fantasy imaginary violence on television. I hate violence, and yet I love the UFC, which is a really weird thing. But when I look at it, it's like, well, there's the violence in the street between two people who are arguing where someone's potentially going to die just for the dumbest reason, right? That's scary. That's the kind of conflict you don't want. Whereas over here in this sport, you have highly trained athletes who do this and only this, and the fight that they're having is at an agreed upon place and an agreed upon time. at the same weight class under the unified rules with the presence of a referee and a
both
doctor.
being compensated for the beating they're about to take.
And they've signed up for it. This is the thing they want to do, and it'll be over in a few minutes, right? Like when it's sort of contained and it's in this other place, then I'm like, well, now it's fine. But when it's out there in the real world, if you just went and punched someone all of a sudden, I'd probably throw up because I'd be so nervous and anxious about what's going on. And JJ, why are you punching that guy? Leave him alone.
Be like, that's Carl Rippencott.
Oh, and he likes being punched. It's a fetish.
When I worked at Take Two Video, one of the most common videos to rent where I immediately flagged someone's account was when they'd rent bum fights.
Oh,
which was a series of videos where essentially you paid two bums to fight.
No,
each
I know,
other.
but what would you flag it with? Like this person rented bum fights?
I would put in their notes like, rented bum fights, don't give any leeway.
Oh,
so like if
gotcha.
they came back and they're like, oh, I returned this, a day late, could you knock off my late fee? Be like, no.
Oh, gotcha.
Not gonna happen. There's no grace for you, sir, madam.
But you helped them achieve bum fights. You helped deliver it to them in a way. You facilitated the transaction on some level. A piece of the fraction of the cents that went towards those bum fights went to your boss, which went to you.
Uh-huh. And they did that to me.
They compromised your morals.
And it's not even my morals. It is my general sensibility about society.
I'm with you though. I'm not a fan of bum fights, that brand at all or whatever. And I wish
it's so exploitative.
I wish that I wouldn't keep getting recommended on the algorithm like, oh, you like UFC, huh? I bet you like watching these two people fight in a gas station. No, I don't. I really truly don't. I don't want to see that. I don't want any part of that.
If you fell asleep while watching YouTube, what do you think you wake up to?
It's probably rain sound.
Oh, okay.
Because I have a lot of ambient sounds that I'll play just off of YouTube. It might be an episode of the Lex Friedman podcast because those are 3 to 4 hour episode, or 3 to 4 hour long episodes. And so maybe you fall asleep in the middle of that.
I made a mistake recently where I was sick over the weekend and I fell asleep while watching a clip that someone had sent me from a show called Coco Melon. Are you familiar with Coco Melon?
I'm very familiar with Coco Melon.
And they said, because there's a character named JJ, and they're like, you got to watch this because I think that you should recreate this as like Coco Melon, but he's about to turn 40 and you could be Coco Melon. And so, and I was so tired and I was on all this cough mess and I fell asleep. 4 hours later, it had played so much Coco Melon that it has now changed all recommendations and algorithms. And to make it even worse, I was logged into my company account for YouTube. So now it looks like KFGO Radio watched 4 straight hours of Coco Melon content. And so that's a real bummer.
Gone are the days of waking up to the DVD menu.
Yeah. Some of the worst DVD menus, the Clerks animated series, because it was about 5 seconds long and went dun, 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 dun. One time at my lake cabin, Dustin Buchanan, Phil London, and I fell asleep watching the movie Suicide Kings, which is so good, by the way. It's a Christopher Walken movie. It's about the mafia. I love it. But we fell asleep, and that had a do 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 do, and then like cracks of thunder and lightning. And at one point, I woke up, and I'm like, one of these other idiots will go do it. And we all did that all night long. Where at one point we were up, and Dustin goes, "Are you guys up?" And we said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Will one of you turn off the menu?" No.
I have never, as far as I can recall, ever fallen asleep watching something.
Really?
I don't think I've ever done that. I don't think I can. I don't think so. Listening to something that's different, but yeah, I don't think
You've never fallen asleep while like there's a video content playing of some kind.
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I mean, maybe I have, and I'm just not remembering it. But
I mean, that's good for you. Like, you should not be falling asleep like with video playing. It's bad for your circadian rhythm.
Well, I think I'm so tuned into video and have been for so long that I can't help but pay attention to it on some level. Or if I'm getting sleepy, I'll just go, all right, I'm going to stop this thing so I can go make sleep happen. But I couldn't just necessarily fall asleep.
I'm going to go make sleep happen.
Yeah.
And now I make eat happen.
Yeah.
And later on, I may poop happen.
Yeah. Oh, I make poop happen every day.
And sometimes, like, you're worried because you think you maybe made poop happen while you made sleep happen.
You know, I just realized I've started that phase of my life where I'm growing weird ear hair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I had more time.
Nope.
No.
I trust me, I was about your age when I started as well. And so I
Yeah.
got a little ear trimmer that I use now.
Yeah. I should probably get something like that.
Otherwise, like, I'll find myself like with an itchy ear and then I'll be like, oh shit. And then I'll start playing
It's
with
a
the
lot
ear
to
hair a
play
little bit.
with. It's fun to play with.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And be like, how smart am I? Can I braid this?
Yeah.
Like, where's an MJ Capelli when I need it?
My Telegram chat with some of my buddies is mostly just talking about how sleeping is awesome. Stretching feels great.
My hands smell like barbecue sauce right now because before we left, I put some ribs on my grill.
Are they waiting for you?
I can't wait. They're gonna be because it's very slow roast, indirect heat. But for whatever reason, when I open them, I like cut open the package and there is a package, like a bladder of barbecue sauce underneath them that I didn't notice because there's so much saran wrap, and it got all over my hands. And even though I washed them, they still smell like barbecue sauce. And I will tell you this, I never want the butcher shop provided barbecue sauce. I will make that choice on my own. Thank you very much. Tonight I'm using barbecue sauce from a guy named Meathead.
That's his name.
Yeah. So he's
You know this guy?
I've interviewed him.
Okay.
And he's like, yeah, try my sauce. He is a dude who redefines everything I think I know about grilling. All of the conceptions, like rest. Remember how we've talked about, like, hey, when you cook a steak, you need to let it rest for like 15 minutes so that the juices redistribute and you can cut it open again. He's like, that's crap. He goes, you let it rest for maybe a minute and then you can dig into it. And he goes, the amount of juice you lose is so insignificant in the long run. Why are people wasting their time with this? And he had like 5 or 6 other things where I was like, dude, you're blowing my mind. Now, I don't know if I believe him 100%, but I'm using a method that he uses for ribs right now. So
last night I watched a video on like 30 ways to cook a burger.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. And then they were like, they were taste testing with a bunch of people. And one of the ways that rated the highest was to smoke it.
Yeah.
Cook it in a smoker, which I never thought of, but I don't have a smoker.
Come on over. I got a smoker.
You got a smoker?
Yeah, I got a Weber Smoky Joe.
Yeah. I wish I knew how to make things like that.
I keep telling you I'm going to invite you over and make a bunch of stuff sometime because my new thing with burgers that I love is I've got burger weights. So like a burger, when you put it on a grill, like, have you ever noticed how sometimes they get real fatty in the middle, right?
Yep.
So the burger weight actually weighs it down so that rather than the juices build up in the middle, they kind of distribute evenly.
Sure.
And so I've been into burger weights, and then you can also do it for chicken. Like there's a recipe called chicken under a brick where French chefs used to literally put chicken and then a brick on it, and it would hold it down so it's cooking more evenly.
Gotcha. I've seen that with like pressed sandwiches, where you make a sandwich and you put a heavy weight on top of it.
But this is through, like, I guess you do that like with a panini, like you put a weight on it the whole time. But this is a little more intense.
Smoking did the best. Steaming did the worst.
Yeah, steamed hams.
Steamed hamburger. I mean, that's basically White Castle, right?
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean, steam is great because you can mass cook a lot of stuff at once.
Do you like White Castle?
No.
I don't understand how it exists.
Because somehow they got the entire world to believe that their food is awesome.
Not me.
So much so that you can buy 40 of them and eat them out of a briefcase made out of cardboard.
It's just like raw, wet burgers.
Yeah, and then like with like just onions. They're like, you know what makes a burger really good? Like 3 onion sprinkles. And that's all you need. I mean, no wonder they sponsored a movie about a bunch of guys who just get baked out of their minds, right? Mm-hmm. I do love that movie, by the way. Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. And then there's Harold and Kumar go to Guantanamo Bay. And then there's Harold and Kumar Save Christmas. I hope that one day I can create something that is so popular that they make a Save Christmas version of it. I mean, Ernest got it. Harold and Kumar got it. You know.
Gotta save Christmas.
Gotta save Christmas.
Christmas is always needing to be saved all the time.
Dude, Christmas is under threat at all times. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. Before this podcast started, Tucker had mentioned another VHS, which is why I mentioned several VHSs, and you're gonna, next time you see him in public, ask him about that VHS. Do me a favor, write this down, put a note in, or maybe just text him right now if you got his number, and ask him about the VHS that we didn't talk about in this episode.